Mars for a Gemini ascendant is one of the more difficult planets. And it's not just simply because it's Mars, because, for example, Mars can be a very good planet for an Aries ascendant, or a Scorpio ascendant, or a Leo ascendant, or even a Cancer ascendant. But Mars is difficult for a Gemini ascendant because it rules two very difficult houses, the 6th and the 11th house. Now, as we learn in a very detailed course in the astrological apprenticeship program on the mathematical expression of yogas, there are yoga breakers, or things which cause more difficulty or enmity in a person's life. And these tend to deal with rulers of houses 3, 6, and 11, and they get worse in that order. So when you get a planet like Mars for a Gemini ascendant, ruling over the 6th and the 11th, the two most difficult of the 3 yoga breakers, well, this shows where the kind of energy that's going to cause a particular ascendant to have the most difficulty in their life. So Mars, by its very nature, is a planet of aggression, a planet of idealism, a planet of violence, a planet of fixing problems, usually in a logical fashion. And for a Gemini ascendant, Mars can cause the Gemini person to be too idealistic. These are the kinds of people that become religious fanatics, or fanatics for a particular cause, or the kind of idealist who thinks they really know everything, and so therefore anyone who doesn't follow their same kind of science, philosophy, religion is delusional, or just doesn't see clearly enough. So it gives a very egotistical kind of intelligence. And we know Geminis can be very intelligent. So it doesn't negate their intelligence. It can just tend to make them a bit of a problematic person when it comes to sharing that intelligence. The 6th house is a house that can deal with injury. And so Geminis will often suffer injuries. And usually it's due to some kind of carelessness. Or usually it's due to believing too much in themselves. Again, that sense of having too much self-confidence, too much belief in one's skills. And we remember that Mars rules over skills, our ability to use our skills. This is one of the reasons why Geminis, whether they're using their skills for the benefit of others or not, or just to make themselves look good, are often very skillful people. Because we know that the Sun, as we discussed in a previous talk, rules the 3rd house for Gemini, which shows that by following their skills, their interests, and their hobbies, that's very inspiring for them. But Mars tends to make them push it too far. So they will be the types that tend to injure themselves through trying to develop their skills too quickly, too fast, without enough planning or preparation. They just want to go in and do it. We talked about opinionatedness. With Mars really typically believes what he believes and always thinks it's right. You get Mars in a trine, well situated, aspected by a nice Jupiter. This will be a person that you want to listen to their opinions and their ideals, even if they are boisterous about it. They can still rub you the wrong way, but you've got a nice Mars. You will benefit by trusting this person. They won't lead you astray. Again, when we think about Mars being like the commander of the army, or the commander of your platoon or troop, you don't want to do what Mars is telling you to do, but you know if you listen to him, you still might get hurt, but you're going to succeed and you're going to come out the other end. But with Mars and Gemini, the person pushes themselves and others too far with their opinions simply to prove a point, and that's when people get injured. Mentally, emotionally, physically. And again, Mars ruling the 6th and the 11th house for a Gemini speaks to this. Because the 11th house, that is our sense of being right in the eyes of others, being validated by others. So oftentimes Mars pushes a Gemini ascendant to be validated at all costs. To be validated at all costs. Not taking into consideration how it might affect themselves physically, mentally, emotionally, or other people. So due to this, Mars really needs to be attended to well, and it needs to be mediated well within a person's life. We've already seen that Mercury is debilitated in the 10th and exalted in the 4th, which shows that, again, a more inward, peacefully directed lifestyle is what benefits a Gemini ascendant overall. When they get too outwardly focused, too directed towards being validated and proving themselves, too scattered by too much activity in the world, they wind up not being very well in their mind and consciousness. So Mars is a difficult planet for a Gemini. It can be used well, but it does take a little bit more awareness, or actually a lot more awareness, because Mars is one of those harder planets to control, just through simple awareness alone. So willpower and discipline are often needed for a Gemini ascendant to master that Mars. Now, Mars, where is Mars exalted for an Aries, where is Mars exalted for a Gemini ascendant? Where is Mars debilitated for a Gemini ascendant? Well, Mars is debilitated in the 2nd house. Mars is debilitated in the 2nd house, which is a house of early childhood, a house of resources, a house of immediate family. And you can add other karkaships or indicatorships from your own studies. But having Mars debilitated in the 2nd house tells us what? Again, it shows us that the Gemini ascendant really needs to control their passions when it comes to the things that they say, the things that they express with their mouths, what they talk about. They also need to be very cautious with their passions when it comes to the foods that they ingest. We already discussed this previously when we discussed the fact that the moon is debilitated in the 6th house, which is Mars's sign for a Gemini ascendant. So here we see a profound focus on really needing to watch and balance Martian qualities when it comes to speech, how one communicates one's sense of self, their ideals, their opinions, as well as the foods that one takes in, how they nourish themselves. And it's tied together very strongly for a Gemini ascendant. Why? Because we have the 2nd lord debilitated in the sign of Mars in the 6th house. We have Mars, the 6th house lord, debilitated in the 2nd house, the sign of the moon. So you see there's this tie between Mars, moon energy, and the 2nd and 6th house. Often, Gemini ascendants will be prone to eat foods that aggravate their digestion, foods that are too hot, too spicy, too stimulating. And that's what it always comes down to, based on this exchange of Moon and Mars, is that they need to be very cautious of overstimulation through speech and overstimulation through what they ingest, what they eat. So for a Gemini ascendant, it's not very fun when it comes to diet. A very bland diet is often advised for them. So it's very good for a Gemini ascendant to work with an Ayurvedic practitioner to work out what are the foods that are best for them, what are the spices that are best for them. And an Ayurvedic practitioner would say that's true for everybody, no matter your ascendant. But as we see, certain ascendants have proclivities to particular kinds of weaknesses and strengths in other ways too. So not everyone's going to be affected by diet as profoundly as potentially a Gemini ascendant. And you'll see that all the time when you meet people who they go their whole life without even considering what they're eating. They live into their 90s and they have hardly any problems, maybe take a few medications, but they're still active and mentally with it. You see other people who spend their whole lives trying to eat well, trying to eat right, and it just doesn't seem like anything they do works. So there's a different kind of constitutional understanding that each ascendant gives. Now again, this is something we need to get into separately in more detail, and that is on the books, so stay tuned. I do have an Ayurvedic practitioner as well as Vedic astrologer who we're going to do a series with on this channel. So stay tuned for that, and we're likely going to do a webinar on it as well, a private webinar with maybe 20 to 25 students. But this is something that's beyond the scope of our current study. Although you do need to learn this, so when you do get into Ayurveda and health and well-being, you will have an understanding of how these ascendants work. So that's Mars generally. We could say a whole lot more about it. Generally debilitated in the second house. But now we have Mars exalted in the 8th house. Mars exalted in the 8th house. Now Mars is a planet that deals with what? Mars deals with taking care of problems that arise immediately. Things that have to be taken care of right now. They're not the long-term problems that you see coming down the pike that you're able to plan for. They're immediate things that need to be dealt with right now. And the 8th house is the house of loss, of fracture, of sudden breaks and changes. So by taking out Mars and sticking it in the 8th house, one of the things that we can see is that when a Gemini uses Mars well, they do have a profound capacity to deal with problems as they arise immediately, right now, and succeed. And even serious problems, because the 8th house can be serious, difficult, life-threatening issues. So Gemini ascendants can benefit by learning to become very adaptable problem solvers, because then that will start to activate this idea of the blueprint of Mars exalted in the 8th house for a Gemini ascendant. Now that doesn't mean that the Gemini ascendant needs to be going out and looking for problems. It means that when a problem arises, a Gemini ascendant will do very well to attend to it right now. And many Gemini ascendants don't do this because they're so scattered. They don't know exactly what to put their attention on. But mostly the advice I give to Gemini ascendants to help them work with this potential of the exalted energy of Mars in the 8th house is to, whenever a serious problem arises, drop everything, deal with that problem right now. That will make their life better. It will create a better foundation. It will make them stronger. It will give them more confidence. It will give them the capacity to logically see what needs to be done to bolster, to prevent future sudden breakdowns from occurring. So Mars can be a good planet for a Gemini ascendant if they consider ways to work with Mars in this fashion. On another note, Gemini ascendants, believe it or not, can often do very well in roles such as being like an emergency medical technician or working in the OR, the emergency room. They can do very well if they're already balanced and centered and focused and internalized and already have built up their internal strength. They can do very well in crisis situations or in work that involves helping people through crisis situations. They can be very skillful in that, but the key is that they have to be very balanced within themselves first. They have to develop that strength of their ascendant lord in the 4th house, strength of the heart center. They have to develop the strength of that moon exalted in their 12th house, having their inner consciousness clear and healthy, gain plenty of rest, being able to internalize and conserve their energies. They have to be in tune with their inspiration and well-grounded in maybe a larger organization, which is that 3rd Lord Sun exalted in the 11th house. Now again, this can play out in many, many, many different ways. So we're not just trying to create a cookie-cutter approach to understanding the ascendants. It can happen in numerous ways. But this is one of the best ways of understanding how Mars needs to be managed for a Gemini ascendant and how it can be tapped into as actually becoming a pretty good strength for a Gemini ascendant.